It is the depth of the feelings that you will have for all these characters. Hello besties, welcome back to my channel. Today is another exciting video for me to film. I'm going to recommend to you, for those of you who want to start reading fantasy and they don't know where to start and they are afraid to pick up a book that would be too complicated for them when it comes to world building, I'm going to help you with that. So I'm going to give you some of my top book recommendations if you want to start reading fantasy. First of all, I think a great way to start reading fantasy is to start with urban fantasy. Since the world building relies heavily on our own world, it's not that complicated to comprehend and they add some magical twists to it. But I'm still going to recommend some epic fantasy, but with simpler world building that is easy to follow. So the first book recommendation is a series. It is the very beloved, it's one of my top favorite series of all time and for a lot of people too, by Cassandra Clare, The Infernal Devices in the Shadowhunter universe. And if you want to start the series, you don't need to read any other Shadowhunter series before this one. This is the first one on the timeline, so you can safely start reading this book series without the fear of getting spoiled for any future books in case you want to continue on with it. The setting is in Victorian London and it takes place in the late 1800s, and we follow Tessa Gray, who is searching for her missing brother, and soon enough she gets entangled with the supernatural creatures of the underworld in London. And she later discovers that her only allies are the Shadowhunters, including our beloved Will and Jem. In this world, the Shadowhunters, they are, you can say, like super powerful humans. They have angel blood in them, so they can see and fight demons. They have these superpowers, super strength, and soon they find themselves up against the Pandemonium Club. It's a secret organization of supernatural creatures. We have vampires, demons, warlocks, and also humans. And basically the head of this organization had created an army of clockwork creatures, and the club is out to rule the British Empire, and only Tessa and her Shadowhunter allies could stop them. And of course there was a romance. That's all I'm going to say about the romance. I don't want to say anything. It is so epic. The first book starts off slow, and I think that's a good thing if you are new to fantasy, so you don't feel bombarded with all this information. But then it picks up, of course, and the second book, and especially the third book, is my absolute favorite from the series. Oh my god, we have the found family trope, which is so well done. There is also a mystery solving and action in a rich historical setting. The only warning I'm going to give you is prepare your hearts to process the torture that these books will make you go through. It was so painful, yet so epic. And it is exactly what makes this trilogy stand out to me. It is the depth of the feelings that you will have for all these characters, especially Tessa, Jem, and Will. I highly recommend this series. If you didn't read it yet, if you want to start reading fantasy, start with this one. The second recommendation is for those of you who particularly want to start reading fantasy romance. I would recommend one of my favorite series of all time. Where is it? The Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. This is a new adult paranormal fantasy romance, and the first book is rhapsodic. And why I think this series is perfect for beginners is that in the first book you get to know the main characters in our world, and in the second book and third book you get introduced to another world. And I think that's a good way to ease yourself into more fantastical elements, since you already know the main players, that you focus more on getting to know the new world and the new characters related to it. And I don't think it's very intricate to grasp. And the main plot of these books is that in this world, everyone knows that if you need a favor, you go to the bargainer to make it happen. And the bargainer is Desmond, our main Fae male character. He could help with anything that a person could want or need, and of course at a steep price. The person will owe the bargainer a favor that he will collect later, and he always collects, except for our beloved main female character, our beloved siren Calypso. He's never asked for a repayment, and she has a long bracelet of beads wrapped around her arm, like to her upper arm, that counts all the favors he's done for her until now. She's a very persuasive siren, and he needs her help with something terrible happening in his world where Fae warriors are going missing one by one, and only the women are returned, each in a glass casket with a child clutched to them. The development in the relationship between Desmond and Calypso in the first book went from close friends to apart, and I was just sucked in from the first chapter. I wanted to know what happened that caused them to be apart, because the chemistry is there when you read the past chapters, because from the start you read the present with a lot of flashbacks and chapters from the past, and you start collecting the bits and pieces of their history. It was so good, and it hooked me from the first chapter. There's plenty of romance and angst, as well as danger and adventure, and it is very easy to follow. I highly recommend the Bargainer series. The next book that I would recommend is Daughter of the Pirate King. It has very simple world building. Basically, you're at sea in a ship and you visit a few islands, and that's it. That's what I remember. We follow a 17-year-old pirate captain, Alosa, who deliberately allows herself to be captured by her enemies because she was sent on a mission to retrieve an ancient hidden map, which is the key to a legendary treasure trove. But what she didn't expect is for her captor, his name is Raiden, who is also the first mate of the enemy ship she went on. He's unexpectedly clever and attractive, and he's completely oblivious to her real identity. And throughout her captivity, Alosa proves herself to be as strong as her father made her, but with a heart of gold, and we witness the back and forth growing, very reluctant relationship between her and Raiden. I really enjoyed the plot line and the ties that start to build with Raiden, and there are a few plot twists at the end that I didn't see coming. I really recommend this one to begin reading fantasy, since it's so light and so fast-paced. The next book series that I would definitely recommend if you want to start reading fantasy is the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. This is a YA fantasy romance, and in this book we follow Evangeline Fox, who has believed in true love and happy endings her entire life, until she learns that the love of her life is going to marry another, her cousin. And in order to stop the wedding, she strikes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, Jax, and in exchange he asks her for 3 kisses that she should give at the time and place of his choosing. But then she discovers that Jax had other plans for her, and that she was a part of a bigger scheme and a bigger plot. This is a fairy tale-esque story with dark twists, and this series is simply made of pure magic. It is so easy to read and follow. The writing flows, and it is so whimsical and immersive, and the plot hooks you from the first chapters. And early on, you will get the feelings that you don't want to put it down. The characters are so easy to understand and their motivations, but they are absolutely not predictable at all. And Stephanie Garber's description is so perfect and on point that it helps you imagine and picture the world and the characters so effortlessly. And speaking of the world building is one of the most beautiful and captivating worlds ever. You literally feel transported and lost within the pages of these books. This series will definitely pull you into reading more fantasy for sure. Next up is another YA fantasy book that I read last year and I enjoyed so much. I thank Fairy Loot for introducing me to Spice Road. It is a YA Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. There is a small hidden kingdom that has been tasked by the gods with protecting a certain sacred tree, and the leaves of this tree can be ground into a tea that awakens and replenishes magical abilities in people. However, when Imani's older brother disappears after having stolen a large amount of these leaves, she finds herself on an adventure to locate him along with 3 other shields. The shields in this world are the people who are protecting this kingdom from the monsters outside, a jinn, and a person who tagged along despite Imani's refusal. And together they discover that there is a world outside their kingdom. And since that it is forbidden to leave the borders of their kingdom, once they go out and they discover what is outside, it was so mind-blowing to them. And especially to Imani, because she never went outside those borders. And they soon learned that the fates of their kingdom and what is outside are intertwined. The magic system in here is so unique, and I really like the writing. It was so easy to follow and so immersive. I loved the world building and the monsters, the creatures and the adventures, and the story has a good mix of intrigue, suspense and action that I believe will keep you invested, and that's why I think it's very perfect for fantasy beginners. My next recommendation is a gothic mystery fantasy romance set in our world but in the past. Belladonna by Adeline Grace. In this book, we follow a 19-year-old orphan, Signa, who can see death and who can't die. She lost her parents when she was a baby, and she has been raised by a string of guardians who were all awful to her and were only interested in her inheritance, and who met an untimely death until she went to live at Hawthorne Manor, where her remaining relatives live. And of course, death follows her around, and death has never encountered a person who wouldn't die by his touch, becomes so fascinated by her. At the same time, we have her cousin Blythe, who is suffering from a mysterious illness, and it keeps getting worse. And Blythe's mother, Restless Spirit, appears to Signa, claiming she was poisoned, and Death and Signa, because Signa can see death, teams up to solve the mystery and save Blythe. The plot, the characters, and the deep dialogue will pull you in instantly. This is one of my favorite books, and I think it's perfect if you want to start reading fantasy, because there are not a lot of fantastical elements in here except for Death and Signa's abilities. The writing was so beautiful. It has a lush gothic feel. The murder mystery was also so well done, and the talk about life and death was very epic, and I loved the romance so much. Overall, I highly recommend this book, highly. If you want to read it as a beginner, or if you just want to read a good book, pick up Belladonna. The next book that I'm going to recommend to you is a YA urban fantasy. It is called City of Nightmares by Rebecca Schaefer. I also thank Fairy Loot for introducing this book to me. The book takes place in a city called Newham that reminds me so much of Gotham City. Here, people transform into their worst nightmare, and we follow Ness, who is 19 now, but who is traumatized because 8 years ago, her sister has transformed into a giant spider and killed a lot of people. And since then, Ness has been terrified of nightmares murdering her, and also terrified of ending up like her sister. Because in this city, if you sleep, there is a risk that you will wake up as your worst fear, and that's why they take some kind of drug, medicine to help prevent that. Now Ness just wants a place to call home. She got herself a free room at a questionable organization. They are called Friends of the Restful Soul. That may or may not be a cult. And one thing leads to another, and Ness finds herself tangled up in the aftermath of an assassination attempt. Now Ness and the only other survivor must find their way back to Newham and uncover the truth behind the attack. What I loved about this book is that our main female character really felt like a real person after all the trauma she went through. She's a self-professed coward and she can't fight. And she was just a regular girl trying to get by, wanting to get back to the safety of her small room. I also loved that I couldn't predict where the story was heading. And also the dark humor. I mean, I laughed reading this book, even though sometimes it was a bit creepy, but Ness would make you laugh. This is definitely a book I would recommend if you want to start reading fantasy that has a very, very unique plot. Highly recommend The City of Nightmares. And yeah, those were all my recommendations if you want to start reading fantasy. If you made it this far, leave me the star emoji. And if you like the video, subscribe so we can become book besties. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!